Well, it's great to be here. Thank you so much for having me, Pastor Dave, at Memorial Day weekend. Can I just ask really quick, how many of you have served in the military? How many of you have served? Can you just stand up? Can you stand up so we can just honor you today? Thank you so much. Yeah. Yes. 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 Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. We owe our freedom to you. I was just watching a documentary last night. I'm one of those nerdy type people in regards to North Korea and how that they are conscripted to go into the military service, and men have to serve for 10 years and women have to serve for 7. Every single individual. And that many don't make it out, some of them don't make it out alive because they are actually starving in the military. And so we are so blessed by our military and our veterans, and so thank you so much. I want to talk this morning about expectations versus expectancy. Expectations versus expectancy. I'll never forget, one of my friends was telling me that they were sitting, her and her husband are pastors in San Jose, and they were sitting with a group of newlyweds, and they were sharing advice. And so they got to her, and they said, well, what advice do you have for us? And she said, lower your expectations. And she said, my husband just looked at me like, babe, what? And she said, that was the advice I had. And so I want to talk about expectations are the quickest way to destroy your peace and shatter your joy if you don't understand the difference between expectations and expectancy. Expectancy does not expect things. Expectancy hopes. It has faith that good will come, but releases the expectation of what or how it will come about. Expectations are the mother of all frustrations. I have people ask me on a regular basis because I go around and I speak, and they always come up, I've noticed that especially ladies at conferences, they want a little piece of you. They want let's just be honest, we're ladies, we love to shop. We love anything shiny, right? It's so true. We're like, oh, wow, I'm at a conference. I hope they have, like, tables that have vendors with, like, shiny things on them so I can buy something, right? And so ladies will always come up to me and they'll say, hey, do you have any books? Do you have any, do you have anything? And have you written a book yet? And when are you traveling to the next place? And are you going to start speaking nationally or internationally? And I always just want to say, I just want to take a nap. Can I get a nap? And I feel like sometimes people have these expectations of the speaker, that they actually hear extraordinary for God and for everybody in the room, especially like if you have a word for somebody at the end of a prayer service and then everybody gets in line and you just want to be like, go sit down, go get your own word. But you can't do that because, then they don't want to give you a love offering. But anyways. However, I've had to place the timeline of my life in God's hands, and it's Dr. Sam who always reminds me, Char, it's your job to go deep, and it's God's job to take you wide. And so I just have to know where my place is. And but I have an expectancy that good things are going to come about for me. But I have to leave the detail and the timings up to God. And so this morning I want to look at 3 areas of our lives where we have expectations. We have expectations of ourselves, we have expectations of other people, and then we have expectations of God. Bonnie Ware, there's been actually a few books that I've used in getting this study together as I was putting this message together. Bonnie Ware is a hospice nurse, and she wrote a book called The Top 5 Regrets of the Dying. It's a terrific book. And she found that out of the number one regret of those who were dying, as she works as a hospice care nurse, she said that the top regret was not having the courage to live true to who they were. Instead, they were living life from the expectations put on them by family, culture, and themselves. And as people, I've noticed that we wear a lot of hats. Isn't that true? We have a lot of roles in this life. And so maybe some of you have the parent hat, or you have the spouse hat, the ministry hat, the working hat, the self-care hat, the spiritual growth hat, the workout hat. I think I got rid of that hat a long time ago in a yard sale. I hate that hat. And all these hats eventually lead us to an item in our wardrobe called the straitjacket. It's true. You ever got the wrong hat on at the wrong moment? You go into work wearing the parent hat. People, you're like, why do people hate me today? Oh, I've got the wrong hat on, right? I've become their mother. Unmet expectations, though, of ourselves lead to what? They lead to burnout. They lead to burnout and depression. And we're seeing a society, I believe, more than ever, that is facing burnout and depression. It's amazing when I travel to Africa how stress-free these people are. I'm like, can I come live in your village? Not really, because I remember when I was on a mission trip to Africa, and I always felt like the Lord had called me to be a missionary until I was drying off with the same towel for like the 11th day. And I was like, okay, wait a second, this is a calling. But when I was over there, the expectations, they lived free. They lived free of so many things that we place on ourselves here in the United States. The expectations to be extremely successful, have lots of money, wear designer anything. But Smith writes in her book, Burnout and Expectations, she says, people struggle with what they think they should do, which is expectations, and what they want to do, which is reality. I know I struggle with this on Saturdays. I should do a lot of things. I should clean up the yard. I should take out the trash. And basically, I want a nap. Isn't that true? After we've gone through you're like, okay, wait a second, I am going to take a nap. I have so many things on my to-do list, I must nap. But there's an apprehension that if we're being idle or ineffective, if we don't do what we're expected to do of ourselves. So we place all these expectations of on ourselves. And I don't want to come to the end of my life and look back realizing that I never became who God had created me to be, because He had placed all these dreams in my heart, and He'd given me the desires to accomplish it, but I didn't follow through because I was worried too much about what other people thought. That I was like the youngest son the oldest son who in the book of John wants to follow Jesus, but he knows he's bound to these religious duties of his father, that he has to go and after his father has passed away, and he has to go and collect the bones a year later, and he wants to follow Jesus, and he says, Jesus, I'll follow you, but first I have to go bury my father. And Jesus responds, remember, let the dead bury the dead. He had all of these cultural things that he had to do as the oldest son. He had to go back and dig up his father's bones and bury them in a different place. And all of a sudden, he's faced with following Jesus or following the culture. And he chose the culture. Not only do I have expectations of myself, but I found that I have plenty of people that have expectations of me as well. People who love me, but basically tell me how to live my life. And however, I found these people aren't really good at, and they're not really successful at living their own life. Have you ever noticed this? I remember an individual who, the last 6 years of my life, I've really been on a health journey in regards to taking care of myself. 6 years ago, I walked into a food recovery program, and because of that, I've lost over 115 pounds. And so, I know, yeah, isn't that really cool? And so, I'm like, whoo, thank God. My body's like, thank you, thank you, thank you. And, yeah, it's just really cool. I'm like, wow, I can cross my legs now. Look at me, I cross my legs. All these. I remember one day, like in the shower, I was like, oh, it's cancer. It's a bone. I have one on the other side. It's a bone, Seriously, there was things I hadn't felt, no lie, for like 3 months. My tailbone hurt, and I was like, I have to go to the doctor. I think, again, cancer. My tailbone is hurting, and it was really just because I hadn't sat on it in so many years. Other people in the program were like, hey, does your tailbone hurt? I'm like, yeah, what's up with that? And I just hadn't sat on it. And so I'll never forget, I was sitting at a dinner, and somebody who was extremely unhealthy was telling me all of the benefits of wheatgrass and how I should drink wheatgrass every day. And I wanted to say, how is that working with your high blood pressure medication? But, I resisted, because there's people in our lives that are constantly trying to tell us how to live our lives, right? I see some heads nodding. And so the second thing I want to say is this, is release your expectations. Each expectation we have of ourselves needs to either be recognized, evaluated, or discarded, or committed to for the work in progress. So one of the biggest problems is that unmet expectations are never identified until they're unmet. Sometimes we don't even know we have an expectation until it's completely unmet. And then we go, oh, wait a second. If you expect that you should wear all the hats perfectly, you're never going to take the time to recognize, evaluate, and discard, because perfect people aren't real and real people aren't perfect. I have a lot of expectations I put on myself in regards to perfection. If anybody's familiar with the Enneagram, that's the really cool, hip, new thing that's, we always have some new test out there to tell us about ourselves. Because have you ever noticed this? What's your personality test? We have all these things that we ask you because we love ourselves and we just want to get to know ourselves more. And, the Bible's like, well, get to know him and he'll tell you about yourself. You're crazy. And so the recommendation here today is to hold a funeral for your expectations and give yourself permission to grieve over them. Perfectionism, it runs deep. It runs deep in my family. And so it's the thing, though, really I've found that perfectionism is based in a lot of fear. And so I'll say, yeah, I really want to do that. Oh, that's a great idea. God, I love that you've planted that in my heart. I'm going to get to that when it's perfect tomorrow. So a lot of my perfectionism leads to procrastination. And it also isn't good for relationships. I've noticed this. My perfectionism can run so deep that, no lie, I remember I went through a period of time in my life where my dish towels had the day of the week on them. So you always knew that, I know this is weird, but I'll share it with you because it's weirdly funny. But you knew every day that you were getting a clean dish towel because if it was Tuesday, it said Tuesday and it was in the clean pile. So you just used Tuesday towel, and then when you were done, right? Isn't this great? You could just go and there's Wednesday, right? And so at night, before bed, I have this night routine. Does anybody else have a night routine? Yeah, don't you love your night routine? Because you're like, I will soon be going to bed. I'm going to do my night routine. And so I would go in the kitchen and I would clean up and I would use the Monday towel and I would get all the spots off the stainless steel. You do this. Am I right? Does anybody else do this? And I'd clean the faucet and because I want to come out in the morning to a clean kitchen. I love that. Cup of coffee, clean kitchen, right? And so my sister, though, was spending the night. And so I took the Monday towel and I set out the Tuesday towel because that was the next day. So you always set it out. It's weird. And the meds help. And so I went in my room, and then all of a sudden, though, I heard someone in the kitchen, and they turned on the faucet. And I was like, oh. And then the thought went through my head, oh no, someone's using the Tuesday towel on a Monday night. I was like, it says Tuesday right on it. My sister and I are total opposites, but yeah, we're best friends. So I have to hold a funeral for my expectations, and I have to give myself permission to grieve. Char, you're not going to be the best at everything. You're not perfect, Char. Put it in the grave. Dig up the hole. Bury that sucker. I don't have all the spiritual gifts. I don't have all the talents and all the abilities in the world, and neither do you, sadly. I hate to tell you this on Memorial Day weekend. But we cannot and we should not expect to, because that's why God put us in the body. That we need each other and that we need Him. So I have to release the expectations I put on myself. And then the other thing is I have to prioritize my expectations, because there's some things that are the expectations in the life of a Christian that are good to have. For instance, of people who have their devotions regularly, only 9% burn out. That's 1 in 10. However, when people do not have a regular quiet time with God, the number increases to 32%. That's 3 in 10. People who actually eventually burn out and they're like, that's it, I'm done. And they enter into states of depression. Quiet time helps us to regain our focus. It sets our priorities in order. The discipline of making ourselves take a time out, not because we've been bad, but because He's so good. And rely on God to give us an advantage over others who are relying in their own strength. I know that when I have my quiet time in the morning with the Lord, I walk in no matter how crazy I've been and how nuts my night was the night before, no matter even if somebody used the Tuesday towel on a Monday night. I know I can walk in the next day and I have an advantage over people who haven't spent their time with the Lord. Because prayer is an expectation in the life of a believer that's worth committing to. So I have to let go of all the other expectations, God, I put on myself. I don't know if you're like this, but I listen to a podcast or I listen to a leadership thing and they mention a program and I'm like, I have to get that. I'm going to do that every single day and I'm going to be the best leader in the entire world. I'm going to do that. And then I hear about workout stuff and I'm like, that's it. I'm just not going to pay the $20 a month. I'm going to actually do the $20 a month for my gym, right? Have you ever signed up for a gym and you leave and you walk out and you think, gosh, I hope I come back here someday? So true. It was nice knowing you guys. It was nice knowing you guys. The other thing is the expectations we have of others. Oh, man, I'm telling you, this has gotten me in trouble so many times. I remember when I was youth pastoring in Winters, I lived an hour away, and I would have to drive from work. It was an hour, even from home it was an hour to the church. So some weeks I would spend 8 hours alone just in the car driving back and forth to the church because I was there, weep for me. I'm a victim. So I would drive Wednesday nights, and then Friday we had skate night. That's when skating was real big, and we had skate night. And then Saturdays we'd have an event, and then of course Sunday, and I was also the worship leader. And so I had this. I couldn't wait because this was like my first like real assignment after Bible school, and I just wanted to be mentored so bad. I just always wanted somebody to because I always felt like I was just super awkward. I didn't know what to do, and I was born without a manual, and like my sister came with one. Have you ever felt like that in life? Like your siblings came with a man, like she just knew how to do her hair. But this was back in the 80s, when the bangs were big, and like she could like actually get frequencies with them, and she just knew how to do everything. She had like all the boyfriends. She was just super popular. She was just really, good with people. And then I was just like, Tina off Bob's Burgers. Seriously, just super awkward. And I always felt like the manual just fell out in the shipping. I was like, hey, that thing got lost. And so I had a hard time figuring stuff out. So I just couldn't wait for anybody to either mother me, mentor me, anything. Please, just, show me the ropes. Maybe it was because I was lazy and they could just say, okay, you do this. And I was just looking for that. And so I had this expectation that my pastor would just be this amazing mentor, that he would sit down with me and say, okay, now we're going to have a mentoring moment. And he would even call it that. And we'd have these like special chairs and we'd face each other and we'd read a book, right? And we'd read a book together, and then he would ask me deep theological questions that would change my life. And then I would just feel the power of God, and I would be like, thank you, Pastor, for this mentoring moment. I'll see you next week. So none of that ever happened at all. There was no book. I don't know if he read much. And no lie. And So I would go and I would spend all this time, and then like once a month they'd take a love offering for me, and then I would look at it and I'd be like, these people hate me. And it turned out to be like everything I thought it wasn't going to be, but I loved the kids and I loved the people. It was great. But I never had these mentoring moments, and so this was back in the day when everything for youth was metal, and I would have to go, and I would drive to the church after work. And have you ever driven somewhere and then you wake up and you're like, how did I get here, right? Have you ever done that before? So I would do this all the time. I'd wake up and be like, oh, I'm at the church, and so I have to get ready, and I have to set up all the metal stuff and hope I didn't cut myself. And then Johnny would come in and all the kids, and we'd minister to the kids, and we'd play games, and everybody would get all dirty and everything. And then I'd be like, okay, Johnny, call your mom. We got to have her pick you up tonight, because I'm thinking in my head, I got to get on the road. I've got an hour's drive. I got to put out the Tuesday night towel, and then I have to work in the morning. I have to get up and go to work, and I had an hour drive into work, and so I'm taking down all the metal stuff. We're cleaning up the nachos. Okay, Johnny, is your mom here yet? Okay, because I'm like, I don't have to take you home, Johnny. You live out of the way. And then the pastor would come in, and he would say, hey, Char, you have a minute? I want to talk to you in my office. And I'm bitter. Man, I'm like, are you kidding me right now? I've got a crock pot full of nacho stuff, cheese. I got to clean up. It's soaking. And then I got to take the metal stuff down and not cut myself. And then I have an hour drive home. And you want me to come in your office and just sit there and shoot the breeze. And so and he couldn't read like facial expressions at all. He didn't realize that I was like totally ticked. I'd be like, And he would just be talking. Now it's 9:30. And all of a sudden, the Lord spoke to my heart, though, and he's like, well, Char, you're the one who wanted to be mentored. This just isn't the moment. This isn't how you saw it, and it's not convenient. So my expectations I had going into ministry were really high. So the thing I've learned about expectations of other people is don't expect others to make you happy. This is actually called codependency. When we place other people in charge of our emotions, we give them full control over our peace. When I need people, I'm not able to love them. I want to need people less so I can love people more. Isn't that a great line? Love creates flexibility. So let go of the expectations you place on others and live with an expectancy that God is going to bring into your life those He wants you to be surrounded by. Know the difference between flattery and favor. One is from God, the other is from man. We all need encouragement, and God uses the body of Christ to encourage us. This is called favor. Flattery, though, is manipulation. Happiness is an inside job. If you're having to go outside of yourself to find happiness, then you're on the road to addiction. The other thing here in regards to letting people, the expectations we have of people is don't expect your leaders to feed you. He's like, oh, thank God. So I'll pay you later, Char. Leaders are there to challenge us, encourage us, guide us, and lead us to places we haven't been. But just as you can lead a horse to water, you can't make them drink. Leaders can serve you a meal, but only you can pick up the fork and eat what's placed in front of you. Sometimes we don't want to digest what's on the menu. We don't want to digest tithing. It gets stuck right here. We don't want to digest fasting, right? Or loving our neighbor, especially since I moved to South Sac and I asked my neighbor to turn down his music. I moved from from Roseville to South Sac, and I just learned some things. It's a little bit of a culture shock. You know, I asked him to turn down his music, and the next morning I got an alert on my phone from OnStar that said low tire pressure. And that fool had gone out and slashed both of my tires. So now when the music's real loud, I just dance, baby. Like, Woo! I've learned my lesson. Welcome to South Sac. But we expect leaders to make everything so palatable. This is a great line, so you got to really listen to this because it's super offensive. We expect leaders to make everything so palatable that when we find our spiritual life lacking, we blame them. Release your leaders from the expectation to feed you and pray for them with an expectant heart, trusting that God will lead them to preach exactly what you need to hear. I hate it constantly because I'm in tons of different churches, and then I'll see other people at different places, and I'll be like, so what's going on? Why'd you leave? Oh, I wasn't being fed. I'm like, what are you, a horse? What is it when people come into church? Here's your feed bag. Here's your feed bag. Here's your feed bag. Okay? No. Come on. Come on now. Come on. Let's grow up, right? The last thing I want to talk about is the expectations that we have of God. The Jews had an expectation of what their Messiah would look like, where he would come from, and what he would do. And they had compiled a list called the 3 Messianic Miracles. And they would say, I could only imagine that they were sitting around like a fire pit one night, and they're like, I don't know, what do you think? Like, if somebody's really the Messiah, what do you think they should do? Like, we should create a list. I think they're like total linear like me. I love lists. Let's create a checkoff list for the Messiah. And they're like, okay, you start. What do you think, Billy? Well, let's see. Okay, I got it. What? Well, if he can heal a Jewish leper. That's the truth. They had a list of 3 messianic miracles that only a Messiah could accomplish. And number 1 was the healing of a Jewish leper. Leprosy was the one disease that was left out of the rabbinic cures, and there was no cure for it whatsoever. Although back in those days, everything fell under the category of leprosy because they didn't know the difference between like rash and hives and leprosy, right? And so everything just kind of fell under that category. And so then they would sequester them, and then they would look at it. Remember in the Bible, they'll say like, and then if it had disappeared, they were free, they didn't have leprosy anymore. Well, it was just a rash, or Billy got hives from, bad shellfish or something. So Luke, the disciple who was also a medical doctor, goes into more detail in chapter 5 of Jesus healing the man with leprosy. It says that the man was covered with leprosy, and this means that he had leprosy, and he was in the advanced stages. And so there were two things in which the Sanhedrin would follow in declaring someone healed from leprosy. It was the observation and interrogation. They were great at this stuff. And here's what they discovered. First, they discovered that the man had been a leper, number one. And second, they discovered that he'd been perfectly healed of leprosy. And the third thing is they discovered that it was Yeshua of Nazareth was the one who'd healed him. It says in Mark 1:42 that immediately the leprosy left him and he was healed. And because the rabbis taught that the healing of a Jewish leper was a messianic miracle, anyone healing a leper by that very fact claimed to be the Messiah. So Jesus didn't have to arrive on scene and be like, I'm here, I'm the Messiah of the world. He knew in his mind, he's like, oh, I'm going to mess with them. What am I going to do today? I'm going to heal a Jewish leper. Right? I love it. The second thing was, they're like, okay, Jimmy, it's your turn. Tell us, what do you think a messianic miracle should be? And he would be like, I know. Casting out a demon from a man who's blind and mute. You say blind and mute. Then Jesus, in Matthew 12:22, then Jesus was presented with a demon-possessed man who was blind and mute, and he healed him so that he could both walk and see. Talk and see. There we go. Sorry, I really do know what I'm saying. I promise. The act of throwing out demons was not all that unusual in the Jewish world of that day. Even the Pharisees, rabbis, and their followers had the ability of throwing out demons. But throwing out demons within the framework of Pharisaic Judaism required one to use a specific ritual, which again underwent 3 stages. Number one, the exorcist would have to establish communication with the demon, right? The second, the exorcist would then have to find out the demon's name, and then after finding out the demon's name, they would use that name to throw the demon out. And there's even occasions when Jesus used this same formula. It was like this formula for throwing out a demon. Remember the guy in the garden who was cutting himself with the chains, and he walks up and Jesus says, "What is your name?" And the guy says, "My name is what?" Ooh, didn't that always scare you as a kid? You're like, ooh, in Sunday school, you're like, ah. Legion, you're like, oh. And Jesus says, and cast into the pigs, and then that's a whole different sermon. So Jesus used that same formula. But there was one kind of demon that caused the person controlled to be mute. So how are you going to cast that demon out if they can't talk? Demon, what is your name? So Billy over here is like, I know, let's give the Messiah something really hard. He's got to be able to throw a demon out of someone who can't speak. And they're like, yeah, that's really good, man. High fives all around. Yeah, woo. But then it says in Matthew 12:22 that Jesus was presented with a demon-possessed man who was blind and mute. And he healed him so that he could both talk and see. The last thing that they came up with was an expectation they had of a Messiah that he would heal someone who was born with a birth defect. And all of a sudden, we read in John chapter 9, they're walking along, and they see a man who's born blind. And one of the disciples says, "Lord, who was it that sinned, his mother or his father?" And Jesus says, "Oh, no, you don't understand. This man was born so that the glory of God could be revealed." We laugh at the Jewish expectations of a Messiah, but I have to realize that I have expectations of my own of the Messiah. 4 years ago, I was driving down the street, and I'm actually a part of this private Facebook group called Schwag, Smoking Hot Women of the Assemblies of God. I didn't start it, I'm just a part, okay? And all of a sudden, one of our missionaries, I pull over, and I look at it because it catches my eye, And one of our missionaries who'd been a missionary for 9 years in Senegal, she said, you guys, 6 months ago, my house was broke into in Senegal. And 2 men broke in, and they raped and tortured me for 2 hours. And they had a knife at my throat the whole time, and they kept telling me they were going to kill me. But they let me go. And the Assemblies of God has brought me back to the United States. And right now, I'm in like a halfway house, and I'm being cared for, and I'm going through intensive treatment and therapy. My counselor says that I should share this with this private group so that I can start my healing journey. And I read this, and my heart sinks. I mean, I read a lot of stuff on Facebook. We see a lot of stuff in the news, but I'm like, really, God? A missionary, Senegal, working with kids? She's like Mother Teresa, right? Who does this to Mother Teresa, God? Oh, Lord. And I remember this thought went through my head. Lord, I don't have any clue of what would ever happen to me. I don't think I could ever. You ever think that when you see somebody else go through something and you go, oh, dear God, God, please don't ever let that happen to me. I don't think in a million years I would be able to live through something like that. That thought went through my head. 2 weeks later, it's Halloween. I'm living in Roseville at the time. I was just getting ready to move to South Sac, and all my friends were like, South Sac, sure, that's a little unsafe, isn't it? I'm like, it's adventure living, guys. It'll be fun. Because I just don't live in like South Sac. I mean, I live in like 47th and Fowler, South Sac, right? Like we're literally like in the wintertime, you know it's winter because the prostitutes bring out the knee boots, okay? So that's my neighborhood, right? Seriously, I actually pass out hand warmers to them. I'm like, hey, ladies, I pass out hand warmers. How you doing? So it's Halloween night. It's 1:30 in the morning. I'm laying in bed, asleep, and all of a sudden this weird noise wakes me up. Now, if you're single, you know you're a light sleeper. Like the next door neighbor could whisper, and you're like, who's there? Right? I'm on it. You're just kind of on high alert. When my parents come and stay, I'm like, oh, I rest so well because my dad's there, you know. And even though he's deaf, I'm like, you know, he's like super hard of hearing, but I'm like, they'll get to him before me. So you just think that when people are staying with you. So I wake up to this really weird noise. It was like a clicking noise. And when I do, I wake up and there's a man in my bedroom. Uninvited. And I startle him. He's over and he's by my television, so I'm moving and I have all these boxes. I have all these boxes around by the television because I was stacking things, and so he's very quietly maneuvered himself behind the boxes and he's trying to turn off my television. He had systematically went through my house, and you know, I'm single, so I sleep with like a night light on, the light above the stove. You know how it is. I don't know if you guys do this, but like even the guest room has a night light, even when there's no guest. I'm like, you know, I just love light. I hate dark, I think. So he's back there and he's trying to turn off the television. And when I see him in my room, because I can see him in the shadow of the TV, I throw back the covers and I go, I promise I didn't cuss. I go, what the? And I startle him really bad. So he turns around and so I see his face. And so you never know what's going to happen in that moment. Like all my life, I had told myself, and I practiced that I would just, if somebody ever broke in, that I would just pretend like I was already dead. So they'd be like, well, she's gone. I got to go to the neighbors, right? I just always thought that I'm just going to lay so super still that they're going to be like, she doesn't have a pulse. I think she's dead already. And so, but you don't ever know how you're going to react. And so actually, I realize now I'm a flight risk. And so I got out of bed. I didn't even know what was really, I didn't really wake up until I was running outside in my pajamas. And in those moments you think, God, I'm so glad I sleep in pajamas. And you're running outside, and I'm hearing myself yell the thing that you never want to ever have to yell is, help me, somebody, please help me. And I'm yelling this. And I run to the neighbor, and I knock on the door, and I said, I need your phone. A man just broke into my house. And she said, you can't use our phone, they're all charging. I'm going to see you on Judgment Day. Right? But God had a plan. God totally had a plan. So I go to the next apartment and I knock on the door, and it was 2 girls that were up, and they were bartenders. And they were drinking shots of Jameson. And so I come in and I'm freaked out, and so they start drinking more. And then they go, "You want a cigarette?" And I'm like, "No." And they're like, "Okay, well we're going to go smoke." And I'm like, "Okay," And so I thought it was all a dream. I thought maybe my friends had played a prank, and I thought, we probably should call the police. And so it really turned out that it really was a man in my house. And they said, "Well, Char, how old do you think he was?" And I said, I think he was 63. And they're like, "He's 61. So, I really saw his face. I got the whole, and he's actually serving time now. I'm in prison. He actually ended up stealing my car, and it became a whole nightmare. And he tried to run the police over, so they shot my car. And it was crazy. It was one of those absolutely crazy, like those things happen to other people. Not me, not in Roseville, not, you know what I mean? I was like, what? Okay, what is happening right now? And then those poor girls that that stayed up with me all night, because then when I found out there was really a man in my house, then when I went back in the house, I was just like, "Yes, Jesus, you saved me. He didn't get me in the name of Jesus." I'm like doing my, whole like dance and everything. And they're like, "What?" And they're drinking more. And literally, I'm just like, "Thank you, Jesus." And one of them, she's like, "I was raised in church." And I was like, "Oh, okay." So it was kind of a cool mentoring moment there for her while I was crazy. But you know what I realized? After I was working through that whole thing and learning how to like sleep at night without seeing his face, because it's really traumatic, and I had some post-traumatic stress, and then, I was constantly looking over my shoulder, and for like a year, I'd wake up in the middle of the night just staring at the door, out of breath, and not knowing why I was sitting up in bed. So I went through those things. But you know who I put on trial? I didn't put that man on trial. You know who I put on trial? I put God on trial. Because this is how the reasoning in my mind went. God, that missionary all the way over in Senegal, God, she'd been there for 9 years working with small kids. God, I don't even like kids. And you didn't spare her from all of that trauma, but you spared me. That man, he literally, the sound that I woke up to was a knife unfolding. That was the sound. That was the click. The officer said, "What was it that woke you up?" And I said, "The only thing I know is that makes that sound is when you open up a knife." And he said, "Well, we found a knife on his person." This man literally intended me harm. But all of a sudden, God stayed his hand. And when I went past him, when he was over by the television, all he did could roar. He just roared at me. He goes, "Roar." I'll never forget it. And I remember later asking the Lord, I was like, "God, why did he roar? That is so weird," except for he's on tons of meth. But, and he was. But why did he roar? And the Lord spoke to my heart, and he said, "Well, that's all he could do." And I just imagine these big angels, like holding his arms down with his knife, and he's all, and he just kept roaring at me as he followed me out of the house and everything. As I'm running, he's following, he's behind me, and he just kept roaring. And I'm like, "But God, why did you protect me? But you didn't protect my missionary friend." And these are the expectations that we have of God. If you've ever been through trauma, if you've ever been through crisis, if you've ever lost a loved one, you ask these why questions. And the minute I begin to ask God why, I put myself in his position. "God, why? You need to answer me. I make myself God." And so now I've had to wrestle through that. And I had these expectations that Jesus will always keep me safe, that bad things really don't happen to good people who love Jesus, and that Jesus will always heal me. I never even realized I had these expectations of a Messiah until some of them were unmet. But then expectancy is different. And so I had to go back and I had to base my expectations on expectancy on biblical promises that, number one, God's never going to leave me or forsake me. Yeah. Number two, that he does put his angels in charge of me. Number three, that he loves me unconditionally and that he has good plans for my future. That sometimes he meets our expectations, but it's not in the way we think he should meet them. We're tired. We've been working really hard, and we're putting things away, and we're hoping that Johnny goes home. And all of a sudden, Jesus says to us, hey, do you got a second? We can meet in my office. And you're like, Jesus, I don't want this to be a Jesus moment right now. The reality is begin to understand as well as that Jesus understands expectations. If he didn't, he would have never said, my God, why have you forsaken me on the cross? And the last thing, this is my very last thing, I promise. Jesus didn't meet John the Baptist's expectations. John the Baptist was familiar with the scripture in Isaiah 61. Isaiah 61 says, the Spirit of the sovereign Lord is upon me, because the Lord has anointed me to proclaim the good news to the poor. He sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim freedom for the captives, and to release from darkness for the prisoners. And now all of a sudden, John the Baptist was in prison. Could you imagine if you were John the Baptist and Jesus was your cousin and you're in prison? You know, I'd kind of be like this to the people. I'd be like, hey. Yeah, I know I'm in prison, but it'd be, you guys just wait and see. You guys just wait and see. You know who my cousin is? Jesus. Right? He's going to get through these guards. The guards are going to fall out, right? And then all of a sudden Jesus is going to come and he won't even need keys. He's just going to touch the lock and a boof, right? But you guys can't come with me. No. Jesus is just going to come back for me, right? You know why? He's my cousin. Look here's a picture on my phone. That's me. He let me baptize him. Right? There's the Messiah. John the Baptist says, there's a Messiah. I'm not even worthy to untie his sandals. John knew that Jesus was the Messiah. It says this, though, in Matthew 12, that when John, who was in prison, heard about the deeds of the Messiah, he sent his disciples to ask, are you the one who is to come, or should we expect someone else? Wait a second, what? John, what are you talking about? Should we expect someone else? John, why are you asking that of Jesus? You're the one who pointed us to him. Remember, you're the one who kicked us out of your car and said we should follow him. You're the one who said, hey, follow this guy. Get on his bandwagon. He's the Messiah. And Jesus replied to John the Baptist's disciples. He says, go back and report to John what you've seen and heard. The blind receive sight, the lame walk, those who have leprosy are cleansed, and the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the good news is proclaimed to the poor. Blessed is anyone who does not stumble on my account. Can I have the worship team come back, please? Thank you. Just set a little ambiance. Jesus knew that John was familiar with this passage of Scripture in Isaiah 61. And you'll notice that when Jesus rephrases it, that he leaves something out that's really crucial for John. He leaves out the portion that says, and release of darkness for the prisoner. He doesn't say that part. Go back and report to John what you hear and what you see, that the blind receive sight, that the lame walk, that those who have leprosy are cleansed, that the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the good news is to proclaim to the poor, blessed it is anyone who doesn't stumble on my account. In Matthew 12:6, it says, blessed is anyone who doesn't stumble on my account. And when you read that, you think, what does that mean? But a different translation puts it this way. Blessed is he who's not offended by me. See, when Jesus doesn't come through and do what we expect, what do we do sometimes? We get offended. That's it, Lord, I'm going to take my toys and go home. You know what? I thought you were going to be this and that. And you know what? God has big shoulders. He can listen to all of that. But the reality is it begins to affect our relationship with him. It doesn't affect his relationship with us. He still loves us the same. He still has a great future ahead of us. He still believes in us. He still wants to give us gifts. But all of a sudden, our hearts become hard because we say, no, God, you didn't come through the way I thought you were going to come through. We put him on trial. We don't put people on trial. And all of a sudden, our expectations of a Messiah, we're the ones sitting around with our buddies saying, I don't know. What should we have him do? I don't know. Like, heal a deaf, demon-possessed guy. And we laugh at those people. But we do the same exact thing